I'm Michael, and welcome to Beyond the Screenplays, What We're Watching, our podcast where we watch a limited television series week by week. Today, we're talking about the season finale of White Lotus, Season 3, Episode 8, titled Amor Fati, available on HBO Max. I'm joined by the Beyond the Screenplay team, Trisha Rand.
Hello, everyone.
Brian Bittner.
Hello, hello.
And Alex Calleros.
Hi.
All right, so we're here. We made it. We're at the end. We know who lives. We know who died. We're going to talk about all of this. What does it mean? How do we feel about it? Discussing kind of the theme and the idea of Amor Fati, right? Making your peace with fate, how that was explored in the characters. And kind of just now that we're at the end of the season, I want to talk about how do we feel about the construction of the narrative this season, now that we have all the puzzle pieces here together. And also, I just want to say, I think in discourse, there's not enough gratitude given to the people that make these shows, and we can get very constructively critical, ideally, but still critical. And it's great that we have this show and that we get to talk about it and watch it every week. So I also just want to put that out there. Gratitude toward the White Lotus cast and crew. Thank you for making the show. I'm very happy that you did.
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear. Before we dive into all of that, going to take care of a little bit of podcast business here. So going to announce right now that we're going to keep this train moving and the ball rolling, and we're going to talk about The Last of Us Season 2 starting next week with the premiere.
Yeah, baby.
Very excited about. The Last of Us game is a classic. We made a video about it on Lessons from the Screenplay. The first season was so fascinating and fun to watch, really well done, and had some surprises that became some of the greatest episodes of television ever, in my opinion. So I'm very curious to see what they're going to do with season 2. I think there's going to be a lot of stuff to talk about, and spoiler free, but comparing to the video game a little bit and its construction, I think it's just going to be part of that. So very excited about that. And it premieres in a week, so we will be talking about it in a week. Format-wise, we're going to release the first episode on the normal podcast channels, so Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening right now. And then for the rest of the season, we're going to make that whole season available on YouTube and for free on our Patreon. And on Patreon, they also give you an RSS link so you can plug it into Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever your favorite app is. And then for our $5 tier patrons, we're going to do a special The Last of Us bonus episode. We don't know exactly what that is yet, but it's going to be cool. So to make sure that you don't miss any of our episodes on The Last of Us Season 2, follow us on Patreon and then like and subscribe on YouTube, and you will not miss an episode. Very excited about that. Okay, but The White Lotus. So the finale, 90-minute finale. Tim tries to kill his whole family, but not Lachlan. Ironically, then, of course, accidentally killing Lachlan, but not ultimately because, I don't know, reasons. We'll talk about that. Rick is unable to keep it together and sees Jim show up and is like, I have to kill this person, tries to get help, can't get help, and so goes and murders him. Twist, it's your dad.
Surprise.
Surprise.
Yeah.
And then Chelsea gets caught in the crossfire and she dies. Meanwhile, Guy Talk has to then kill a man to earn the right
be a man.
To
to
impress his
advance his career and
Get the girl.
get the girl. Belinda sells her soul with her very pushy, weird son. I don't like that Zion kid. Sells her soul, gets rich, gets $5 million, wears black to signify that, oh man, she's done the thing. Sails off into the sunset on kind of a yacht, leaving behind someone that she had a genuine connection with, and now is kind of like one of the White Lotus clientele in a way, right? Mm-hmm. Definitely signaling that. And then my favorite part, the friends resolve in a sort of anticlimactic way, but in a very touching way. They're all at the dinner table and they're talking about how they feel about each other. And I feel like there's a really great speech delivered by Carrie Coon amazingly that made me really emotional and felt like, I don't know, very well observed and honest and stuff. So that's all the things that happened. What do we feel about it? Alex, how are you feeling in this moment?
You know, it's interesting. We talked before the episode. I think Trish posted on our Discord channel. You know, it's either going to be total insane, carnage, bloodbath, everybody dies, or two, like nothing happens, and it's going to be kind of like a Mike White's making a point about something. And it was kind of closer to one, but not all the way, because yeah, the family didn't drink the seed juice, and even Lachlan, who didn't drink enough. I guess there's not enough residue to like fully kill him. And yeah, in the end, it was more this kind of tragic story about Chelsea and Rick, and Rick being the guy she wants to fix, and he's not fixable, and it's the doom of them both in kind of a tragic Shakespearean way. So yeah, it was a weird feeling watching the episode. I was both really enjoying it, because I think just it's the execution on a directorial level, the music, cinematography, the editing. I was really enjoying just watching it as a piece. Story-wise, as far as like culminating all the arcs, I agree, Michael, that it didn't feel as there weren't the kind of surprises that would have been like, oh wow, that really clicks it all into place. And the resolutions we got, I was fine with. But yeah, there wasn't that like the Trisha extremes that were laid out. It was neither of those. But yeah, I mean, I did like the kind of ironic, kind of darkly comic statement of Belinda coming into that money and then becoming the Tanya to Porchai. She was abandoned by the wealthy lady in season 1 who was maybe going to help her start a business. She is now doing that to somebody else because she's like, hey, I'm rich now. I don't really need to have this dream or this goal. I want to be rich for a few minutes, which also is fair. Like, I understand that it's like her life has just been changed. And a minute ago, she was, thinking that a way forward had to be starting a business. But it's like, maybe that's not what she wants to do actually at all. She just wants to like relax for a while. So I don't think she's quite the same as Tanya, but I think there was a very intentional mirroring there of she's now abandoning the person who's stuck in the menial job at the White Lotus while she goes off to live her new millionaire life. And I also did like what the near death of Lachlan, I think, did for Timothy. I think there was something about almost losing his son, facing that death for real, that when he's on the boat and kind of is like, you know what, we're going to get through this. And he's watching the water and kind of at peace with everything. I think the near death experience, I think, was important. If that's where his character is going to end, I think that helps me believe he gets there because he's like, you know what, I almost lost somebody. I got them back. That's what I'm grateful for, and kind of nothing else matters actually. But yeah, so all that is to say, I think it was uneven in where all the chips landed. I think a lot of character motivations didn't make sense to me. Why is Lachlan reusing dirty, Vitamix or whatever, Bosch blender that was? Why is Rick so nonchalant about coming back to the hotel whose owner he just threatened with a gun? And like surprised almost to see that he's like back there now. So yeah.
Also, something we haven't mentioned all season. Why does Gary hang out at a White Lotus?
Right. A lot of convenient things this season. But I have to say, my experience watching it, I was very entertained, and I did enjoy the kind of like just the build, the build and the kind of like fake outs and like who's really going to die, what's really going to happen. So I don't know. I enjoyed it. I can find a lot to quibble with, but I felt like it was a enjoyable cinematic TV experience overall.
Cool. Brian, what are your thoughts?
I mean, first of all, I think the White Lotus needs to shut down. Like, there's
mass shooting.
Yeah, like I want like season 4 to just take place at corporate and have them be like, what is happening? Just to figure this out. I like overall, I think it was overall I'm sort of mixed to positive. I think I was more negative when the credits rolled, and I'm more positive after having spent some time with it. but it just felt a little like too little too late, which was kind of the feeling I had going into the last 2 episodes, I think. Some of the themes felt really messy in a way that I want to get into. Some choices didn't feel supported. Some things I think were excellently done, where I was like, this is genius. I'm so happy with the way they're doing this. Several loose threads over the course of the season that just never went anywhere, which is kind of frustrating because, again, when we talk about like why did it need to be 8 episodes and if the finale needs to be 90 minutes, that means you've got still a whole lot left. And it's like, okay, but then let's go back and identify all the scenes that did absolutely nothing for the themes, the character arcs, the overall plot, right? And yeah, my other note was just like it felt like a lot of characters had like a 3-episode arc that took 8 episodes to get there. And I think that when you do an ensemble piece like that, you kind of have to decide either everyone has to have the same amount of story, like the same amount weight of story, or we just have to accept some people are just going to not be on screen a lot because their story doesn't have as much to it as other characters, and that's totally fine, right? You can have your bigger characters, your smaller characters. Certainly Gaitak and Mook in the first like 2 to 3 episodes felt like they were just kind of like, hi, we're just kind of stepping in to show up, and then like that became a big storyline. But this feels like the actual weight of each story was all over the place, but the time was the same, which meant that we had just like long things of like, you know, again, we've identified Rick and Timothy especially as 2 characters. It's just like they're still thinking about the thing they're going to do one of these days, you know, and it's like, let's have a long zoom in on their face while they look really upset about the thing that they're thinking about, you know, for the 7th time this episode. So it definitely felt like the more the Timothy stuff I think kept going, the more I was like, you have to do something that feels exciting after all of these flashes of what's going on through his mind. And it felt like that wasn't quite what I wanted. And I don't know if I wanted it to be worse or better or what. And then it's like, even the thing they did do, they didn't commit to actually doing. And it's just like with Lachlan. So I don't know, just a little bit all over the place. And then the more I think back on it, the more I'm like, I can sort of find a way to make everything make sense, but I wanted it to all feel really satisfying and aha. And like this all makes thematic sense, or this all makes sense for this character in the way I think Gaitak's choice made a lot of sense. Like I was just like, this is a character who's constantly faced with these 2 options, and even though we know which one we want him to take, if he takes the other one, that still feels supported by by everything we've seen, right? The other characters I didn't feel the same way about, we can get into it, but yeah, kind of a little all over the place with the season and with the finale.
Yeah, I'm in a similar boat. Trisha, what about you?
Oh, where do I start? I have so much to say. The first thing I want to say is that coming into the White Lotus season 3 with no context about this series,
As we decreed,
did me a disservice. Yes, which you guys prevented me from having.
I had a lot of fun with this experiment.
I'm so glad you enjoyed yourself, Michael. I just, you know, I want to say that some of my favorite filmmakers in the whole world, possibly my favorite filmmakers ever, are the Coen brothers. And the Coen brothers can be a little bit challenging when it comes to narrative form, what they're trying to do thematically, tone-wise. They can often be bumpy for some people. And a lot of their movies really work for some people and really don't work for other people. And I think it's overall fair to characterize the Coen brothers as, especially in their early days, being sort of experimental, right? They have a very unique brand, and it wasn't a thing that had been carved out for them before they arrived. They had to carve out that brand for themselves. And I think even now, when you go and watch their films, you are at a bit of a disadvantage if you haven't seen many of their movies, because you would not know what to expect from these filmmakers. And I feel that way about Mike White. I did not know what to expect. I have no context, truly, for him as a writer and as a director. And basic required reading, I think it's safe to say at the end of this experiment, is having watched the first 2 seasons of The White Lotus. I think it's just fair to say this is not an anthology, and if you haven't If you're not in any way familiar with the show or Mike White or both, you're probably going to be at a disadvantage when it comes to accessing whatever is going on this season. That's thing number one. And that was my experience overall the course of this season. Now, I will also say...
concluded, and we have our verdict.
Not an anthology.
And I think what's interesting is that was not the case for season 2. I watched season 2 without having seen anything more than the pilot episode of season 1. And I was able to get it because it wasn't as experimental, I think, in the way that season 3 has felt, in that every episode did feel like it had plot and things were moving forward. And and so it's interesting how, coming into the season, I was like confident that like, oh, sure, Trisha can jump onto season 3, no problem, because that was my experience last season. However, this was a very different experience, season 3.
Yeah, and I'll say the Belinda, Gary Gregg stuff is the biggest part of that, right? So it's like the episode 1, you're like, ooh, look who it is, you know, and then they see each other, and it's like, ooh, they're seeing each other, and then even having Belinda sort of become Tanya at the end of the season, all of that makes it feel like, yes, this is very much in conversation with especially season 1 in a way that, like you said, season 2 and season 1 were a little bit in conversation, but not nearly this much.
Yeah.
Well, and I would venture to say, again, just basing this on what I have in front of me, I would venture to say that it goes beyond plot and character, right? It goes into the very like texture of the show itself, into the structure of the show itself. When it comes to what is actually experimental overall in the DNA of the show. And this season does feel experimental in a lot of significant ways. And so, you know, we've highlighted some of the lack of interest in dramatic convention here, or dramatic construction even. I think that there are a lot of things that are being purposefully messed with, probably for thematic reasons, which I can't wait to get into. But in the same way that a Coen Brothers movie wants to use the format of what they're making to discuss something thematic, I think that that's kind of going on in this season. And sometimes it works without context, but in a lot of ways I feel like I just wasn't able to get to it. And partially because it's messy and maybe because it's experimental. Now, a couple other things. Something else I want to say is that what I said on Discord about it's going to be this explosion of violence like The Screen at the beginning, where it's panning around to all of these like people in chaos and distress and getting torn apart by animals and struck by lightning and having sex with each other and all of that stuff. Like, that was not so much of a prediction as like I would be entertained if it went this way. And I also would be equally interested and entertained, maybe to a frustrated point, but if there were absolutely nothing happening, right? Like if everything was purposefully fizzled out in the least climactic way possible. Again, that was not a prediction. That was like, this could be a way that it goes if it was going to take a really big swing. Ultimately, I do not think it took as big of a swing as either of those things. What it took was something interesting, but not as interesting as a grand, huge thematic statement about X. About spirituality, which is what the season is purportedly about, or even about just like human nature. I don't think it makes the grandest, strongest statement possible about any of those things because it kind of didn't really swing for the fences here in the finale. The third thing I want to say is that when you are doing something experimental, especially when you're in the third season of something, you're going to have some divided reactions. And I was doing some research today, and this finale has definitely divided critics, even fans of the White Lotus. So it isn't just me. I wish that I had gone back and watched the first 2 seasons of the White Lotus, but even people who have kind of struggled here. Not everyone. Some people really, really like this. But I do think it's worth noting that you're trying some stuff. So not everybody's going to get on your wavelength. And it feels like there's almost like a meta debate happening in the text of the show about, narrative form and structure and what people want from the show or from shows like this. What kind of show is like this? That's a question I've continued to have and still have after the finale. So all of those things are baked into my reaction here.
Yeah.
Interesting that this episode opened with a speech by the
Yes.
monk about resolution and not getting resolution. And yeah,
Oh, yes.
that was
I
felt
clocked
very
it.
pointed.
I clocked it word for word. The final line of that speech is, "It is easier to be patient once you accept that there is no resolution."
Yeah, well, and so the meta conversation around the White Lotus as a show is interesting, and we talked on our film club that we have, our monthly film club, over on our Patreon, and with some of the patrons. I brought up this idea of like the third season, where it takes 3 to make a pattern, and so after you do 1 and you do 2, you kind of have a decision to make: do you keep with the pattern or do you break the pattern? And I feel like this show is wrestling with that a little bit. And to your point about the kind of experimental form of it, like, it knows that you have seen the White Lotus. I think that is pretty clear by the end. By the end, I think
It presupposes that you've seen the White Lotus.
right. Yes. And it is aware that you talk about it and you've seen the memes and you know what to expect a little bit, or there's a mental game that I feel like the creator is playing with you as the audience on top of just trying to tell the story. And ultimately I found that kind of frustrating about this season, where like I would have preferred if the show had just told me the story instead of trying to do a third season of the White Lotus, kind of is the vibe I get from it. And I watched the beginning of the first episode again, and then was thinking back about some of our conversations. And early on, after episodes 2 or 3, we were kind of tossing out some ideas of different narrative structures that it could take. So like the shooting, what if that actually happens halfway through the season? Like, what would that do? And as I was watching the finale, I was thinking about that for whatever reason, to me, the character arcs, the thematic ideas that were getting set up in this season, to me, I feel like would most fully be explored post this shooting. Like, Rick finding out that he's killed his father is like a big deal. Like, I want to see him wrestle with that. Like, that's the most interesting thing. Maybe we get 5 minutes of that maybe before he's like dead in the water, and like we really don't have time to spend with him in that moment. Or Timothy, after he's realized he wants to live or wants his family to live, but maybe now it's too late. I don't know, there's something about where these characters end up feels like that is like the catalyst for the deeper thematic exploration of these things, but instead it all happens in the last like 20 minutes of the show. And again, to our greater point, why then was this 8 hours if some of the most interesting stuff is just there at the end and then we drop in?
I truly cannot believe we didn't get Victoria Parker Posey's reaction to finding out that she is poor now. That's like the thing that honestly it's been building up most of the time, is like, because what else is Victoria there to do except react to stuff in the most memeable way possible? And I just can't believe that they didn't show it to us. It's wild.
Yeah, I was reading a review of the finale in New York Magazine, and she brought up that like that Carrie Coon monologue that we all, I think, really loved. The performance was great and it was really touching. That could have been more earned if they had like a near-death experience as the 3 friends. If they were standing right there next to a shooting and suddenly all the petty stuff that has been building the whole trip suddenly kind of gets thrown into sharp relief with like, oh my God, we almost died. We're all alive. We all started this life together. My life's a mess, but I'm happy for you. I'm happy for you. Like, that could have felt like it came out of something versus like she slept with Alexi, woke up hungover the next morning, like kind of saw her friends out in the pool, but like I don't know what that moment meant. And then she kind of arrives at this monologue, but it didn't feel like a climactic thing had happened to like shake things loose and earn that monologue. And so yeah, I agree. There's a lot.
And then
of
they
things...
are there at the shooting and
right.
run away.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't matter. Yeah,
it's a little it's like out of order. And even just there's kind of a tidiness to the wrap up after, like, we've never had this happen at the White Lotus before. We've never had like multiple gunshots going off right in the middle of the resort, killing like several people. And you still have on the same day, I think, people riding off on the boat and kind of not super traumatized, and you have the line of employees waving, like, shouldn't there be cops here, like, asking people questions, and like nobody can leave until we like investigate this? Like, you could have had a whole second half of the season of, I want to get the F out of here because a mass shooting happened, but I can't leave because like the Thai authorities are saying we all have to stay put until like the investigation's concluded. So like, I think there were ways to make a really interesting, it could have even just been the last 2 episodes, but like the fallout of the shooting would have earned all of these kind of climactic moments for the characters. Even Guy Talk, you know, like, I want to know, like, was it just fine? He shot the guy and now he's kind of like happily in a relationship and happy to be the driver for the owner lady? Or like, was there a bit of an arc afterwards of like, what have I done? Who am I now? Am I still a Buddhist? So yeah, a lot of like juicy stuff left on the table that you could have had in the aftermath of this like really big event.
So yes, I mean, this like the tidiness that you're talking about strains credulity to like a really comical degree, I find. Like, I'm sorry, Tim would have lots of questions to answer. Lachlan was dead. And even the fact that he's no longer dead does not excuse the fact that he drank some poison and was dead. And like, no one has questions. Lachlan doesn't have, we're not going to take him to the hospital. We're not going to get him looked at. Like,
the coconut milk was off.
It was off.
It's like, Zion is like in the water finding bodies, and then moments later we see him, he's fine, happy,
like,
bye, I'm rich now, the deaths don't matter. It's like, I don't know, just the logistics of how it plays out. I can't even start with the he was your father. It's so tropey. Like,
that shocked me, actually, that's how
that they really went for it.
Yeah.
That it was that tropey, and the reveal came at that moment that way. He killed my father. He was your father. What? All of that is just bonkers.
The line isn't even "he is your father," "he was your father." It's "he's your father," which doesn't even like. I feel like the "is" needs like weight to it. Like, that was a weird.
He told me.
He told me. That's also like, I have so many follow-up questions about all of this. And, like, I don't know, just the convenient way of like, you didn't miss out on much, kid. Your father was an asshole. Blah blah. I'm like,
right, the third person.
What?
Yeah.
I hate this. I don't know. It feels sloppy and contrived. I don't think the writers of the show are sloppy or contrived, but to your point, give these beats room to breathe, right? Like, if all of this takes more time and more dramatic weight, it starts to feel a little bit more grounded. And I understand that this is a satire, but it still has to be grounded in some physical reality or world that we occupy. Like, there have to be authorities. I don't know, there have to be consequences. It's just wild to not do it.
Well, and you mentioned satire, and I think part of what has been difficult about this season is I've called out like the feeling of doom hanging over it occasionally, and it feels less satirical in some ways than the previous 2 seasons, and less light, less fun. And so then when you have a wrap up like this that feels more in line with the kind of satire, light fun of the first 2 seasons, it feels off because it's like this felt more grounded and serious.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do to the thing I keep thinking about is sort of expectation, how a show tells you to watch it, and you know, way back in the first couple episodes, I talked about season 1, where I was like, oh, it feels kind of like cheating, that they're like, someone's gonna die or whatever. But then you start watching the show, and then when that doesn't happen in the first episode, you're like, oh, okay. And then you just forget about it because it doesn't really matter. And these characters are all just kind of hanging out, talking about petty stuff and money and whatever. This season is that person has a gun. That person has a gun. This person's going to kill someone. This person's imagining killing everyone. Right. And I think that it's like, the more that you build that tension and the more that you tell me these things are going to happen, then the more frustrating it is when they don't. And that can be interesting if that's done for a specific reason. You know, I do think the Timothy storyline is trying to do that. It's trying to be like, look how close we came to Family Annihilator kind of stuff. And what we actually got was it's nothing effectively, right? That is interesting. But then to your point you guys were making of just like, right, but the whole thing with Timothy is like one of two things is going to happen. They're going to find out what's going on with him, or he's going to kill them all. And then neither of those things happen until essentially the very last, like they open their phones and we're like, well, see you later, fam. And then it's like, okay, but like, you know, I think about the opening scene of Inglourious Bastards, right? Where it's like all built on this tension of like, what's going to happen? And then when the thing happens, it feels cathartic and it feels big and exciting and like it's a payoff of what happened. I think Breaking Bad would do this, where it'd be like entire seasons of just building tension, but then a thing would happen and you'd be like, oh man. And again, I think for thematic reasons, I think that Mike White is playing with that idea. I think he wants you to be wanting a certain thing to happen. But I think that the biggest difference between this season and the previous two is that this season keeps telling you, it keeps showing you violent things and guns and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which almost makes it feel like, okay, we need that to happen sooner, or we need more to happen, or we have to do more with all of this, rather than just be like, here's a shootout over here, nothing happens over here. Some of these other characters have nothing to do with any of it, you know. Even like the Gary Gregg stuff, it's like, well, because we open on Zion, I know none of the Gary Gregg scenes are going to end in violence against Belinda, because we know that she's the only character essentially that we know is still alive, because especially if Zion's in the scene with her. So then that can be frustrating too, where it's like, oh, when she's going into this meeting, what's going to happen? It's like, well, I already know what's not going to happen, because that is the one thing you have shown me. So I don't know. I just found myself frustrated a lot with the fact that the show was telling me to feel a certain way and then not kind of delivering on the thing that it was telling me. It's one thing for me to have my own expectations. It's another for the show to be telling me a certain thing and then not doing that thing, if that makes sense.
Even the amount of buildup with the brothers, and like there's a lot of time spent on like their relationship, that plot line. And it just is kind of so quickly resolved in this episode of just like, Lachlan's like, I'm a people pleaser. That's why I did all of this. And the brother's like, well, let's never talk about it ever again. And that's it, I guess. And everything's fine. It is wild. Like, again, the amount of real estate of buildup to payoff. And like, it feels imbalanced.
Yeah. I do think it's a real estate problem. Like this season is too long. Like right. I think we've said that like 12 different times in 12 different ways, but I think that is really the source of a lot of this frustration, because even as you were pointing out, Brian, you know, we see so many versions of violence, or so many instances of setting up. There could be violence here, there could be violence there, that it's just like it's ever present, and it's accumulating over 8 episodes of this. And so it's taking up mental real estate of like, the thing this show wants me to really be aware of is like, who's going to kill who, and that's going to mean something. And I think at the same time, you know, people call this show a character study, and it is a character study, but as we're saying, a lot of the interesting character things to study would have happened after this violence, right? Like we have the initial starting conditions, things change, their phones get taken away, they're not rich anymore, I guess. And that's like, seeing that reaction creates meaning, what they choose to do with that. But then, as we've called out, there aren't really that many reversals or other actions that were taken. And so we're sort of just left studying the same state for episode after episode after episode. And I feel like truly, if this season was the same storyline and the same content, but 3 hours shorter, it might just feel better because of the momentum and the amount of just like space given to each thing might feel more in balance for where it ends up.
And I want to say this really quickly because I've seen this term thrown around on the internet about character study. And a character study is a thematic study in drama, really. If you take a character, because theme is most clearly expressed in narrative through character and character arc. So, if you want to have a very compelling character study, what you need is a thorny and compelling thematic question. And it should be clear. And then the characters that you take along the journey need to explore different aspects of your theme. And on a really basic level, I think the themes here are very muddy. I think they're interesting. I think they potentially have enough teeth to really engage a dramatic character study season of television. But I don't know that that's being accessed here because they are messy. So one of the things I did before I watched the finale was I went back and I watched this conversation. It's in the third episode between the three friends where Michelle Monaghan's character is talking about organized religion and she's kind of critiquing it. And in my mind, I had remembered that it's a mini monologue. It's really, truly not very long. It's like, I don't know, 5 sentences or something. And in my mind, I had remembered her talking about narrative, like basically religion as dramatic structure narrative. And she's kind of highlighting the patriarchy inherent in Western religious models, which it is. And so what she actually says, it is actually not really textually about narrative. She doesn't really ever say like the story. She kind of does. She says it's so male centric. The father sacrifices the son, who's also male. The epic struggle of good and evil, I don't really connect with it. And then I think it's Kate that says, oh, you want the women to be centered in the story? And she says, no, nothing like that. But I don't know. She says something like, I don't know. It just doesn't mean much to me. And I think that's interesting. I think that Carrie Coon's monologue is interesting. I think where she says, I tried to make work my religion. I tried to make love my religion. I tried to make motherhood my religion. And I basically failed at all of that. And what I'm left with is time. And I'm just happy to have spent this time in this long relationship with all of you. And it's really beautifully said. It raises this point about religion. And of course, that's interesting that the women are being centered in that story. But it raises this point about religion in sort of its inevitability, right? Like that you kind of will end up having a religion, that people need religions to survive. And you can choose Eastern religion. You can choose Western religion. Eastern religion looks like this. It looks like, we see it in Sam Rockwell's journey where he starts off sober and then he's not sober anymore. And then at the very end, he's back in the temple and he's praying, right? And we see that journey with him. We see Piper realizing Eastern religion is not for her. So she's just going to go back and I don't know.
Become a Karen.
I guess so.
I did love Parker Posey's performance during that scene.
I mean,
that was like, that to me
Victoria's
was
incredible.
Yeah.
That scene between the two of them was just when I was like, mwah, like you're doing everything I want you to do with these kind of conclusions. It's like, I don't need the character to make, again, what I'll call the right decision. I need to make it feel like it was like the perfect conclusion to what this character and what these themes have been dealing with over the course of the season.
Yeah. We see it with Guy Talk. Guy Talk is very devout in his religion. He chooses a new religion. And in this episode, he chooses Mook and money and success. We see it with the brother characters where it's actually framed in religious terms. It's okay for you to worship me, but don't worship me, right? And it's interesting. The father sacrifices the son is something that, she says in her monologue, that Jacqueline says in her monologue about Western religion. And then we see the father holding the son by the pool. It's very like Abraham and Isaac, if you're familiar with that story from the Bible. So I think there's so much in here that is revolving around this idea of spirituality and religion. And we all choose a religion. And that's like, we basically need some kind of belief system in order to exist and survive. Chelsea's religious beliefs lead to her death. Her religion is Rick. And like we see them the way that they're lying in the water is faced like yin and yang, right? We see it actually. It's very on the nose symbolically. It's smart writing, but it took us this long to get here. And throughout the entire series, it has been so loosely held together. And all of that thematic content has been so interjected with other ideas and other themes and things, you know, violence and money. And like, it's all just kind of been jammed in there and muddied instead of being crystal clear, which I think it could be. In what other ways is this show about religion? Is there something about watching it every week that is a religion to Western viewers? Is Mike White doing that to us? Maybe. I think that's interesting. I wish it were in the show. Belinda chooses a new religion at the end, right? She says it would be morally wrong. And then she says, no, Zion, go close the deal. And now I'm going to be rich and I'm going to do this cyclical thing that happened to me. I think all of that is so interesting. I just wish that the show crystallized it, clarified it, made it more parsable as it was going along, so it didn't have to snap into place at the end when there are all these other dramatic problems.
Yeah, I want to talk quickly about Belinda versus Guy Talk, because I feel like they both made the same choice.
They did.
And yet the Guy Talk choice felt like it was so supported by everything we had seen with his character throughout the course of the whole season. Belinda felt like she seemed like more of a character who kind of had one way of thinking, and that wasn't really questioned that much. And then at the end just kind of went, nah, money. And like, that was it. And I'm sure you could argue that there's more to it, but I think to what you were saying, Trisha, I wanted her choice at the end to feel to me like what Guy Talk's choice at the end felt like to me, which was just like, man, that's rough, but I get it. Instead, I was like, I don't really get it. I mean, obviously I get why someone would just take $5 million and go live their life and do whatever, but it didn't feel like that was supported in the text other than the callback to the first season. It didn't feel like that was a conclusion of many scenes that I had seen of Belinda struggling with choice and her own belief system and everything, so that when that happened, it like clicked for me. So I think the two of those characters are interesting to study side by side for that reason.
It's interesting because I agree with you that I think Belinda's scenes throughout the season didn't feel like they were building to this. However, where she started and once again, if you'd seen the previous seasons, where she came from in previous seasons was this person who was financially not well off, who, when she comes to the White Lotus at the beginning of this season, is kind of just like, God, can I catch a break? Like, she really feels beleaguered. And I think there is something there this payoff of like, you know what? Screw it. I don't want to feel that way anymore. I always want to be rich. Does feel like it comes from somewhere in her character of just like, she's had these opportunities that have been snatched away from her. She's just tired and she just wants to have a break. And finally she has a break. And so that's why I was satisfied with her ending here in a way, actually, that to me, I was more satisfied with it than Guy Talk. Cause I think Guy Talk, you know, within this episode is about to quit. He's about to like say, I can't do this. I don't want to do this. And just to see no like A to B to C from the time he shoots somebody for the first time in his life to like living his cool life with his shades on and like driving the car, that didn't feel satisfying to me, actually. I was actually much more satisfied with Belinda's, you know, like, screw it, I'm gonna be rich, and the kind of like satire and thematic thing that was doing. I also just want to call out, and this has been called out online as well, you know, the Patrick Schwarzenegger's performance looking at Chelsea and Rick, and then just the look on Saxon's face there. That's another example. I think you're talking about, you know, what's kind of like the religious conversion for all these people. And, you know, I think Saxon sees that these two humans have this like amazing connection that is real and genuine and not transactional in the way that he thinks of everything as being transactional. And so that was a really interesting moment for his character. Like, by the end, he's the one on the boat reading a self-help book and has really done a 180 in a way that a lot of other characters haven't. So yeah, I thought the Saxon arc was interesting, and I thought his performance at least really sold me on something had changed in him watching the way Chelsea and Rick feel about each other.
Yeah. I mean, So many great performances. I also felt similarly to what you were saying, Alex, about the guy talk thing, that it felt, if it had come sooner, I would have bought it more, like when he was more ambivalent about it. But like we saw him make the decision of like, I'm going to quit. And then the show was like, no, you can't do that yet. And he was like, no, I'm going to quit. And the show was like, no, 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 wait. And then it's like, okay, now you shot someone. Now what are you going to do? And like that, yeah, I found that a little frustrating, of like extra beats that we maybe didn't need. But yeah, to the messiness of the themes, what's so fascinating to me about this show is like, even as we're talking about all these things were very frustrating to me, also in my head I'm like, God, I love this show, where like like all these things are in there. And as you're saying, Trisha, there are these times when they are sharply rendered, and I'm getting meaning, and I'm reacting, and I'm thinking, and getting this like deep experience from it. And then there are these other moments where it is messy and things aren't connecting, and I'm like, why isn't this more clear? I don't understand. And it's, again, kind of like you were also saying, unlike any other show, I feel like it can somehow, the season somehow had both excellent themes and excellent manifestations of those things through the character arcs, and then other ones where it was just super frustrating and I didn't quite know what it meant. And there were like competing lenses through which I was being asked to look at character actions, and I didn't, because of that, I wasn't able to discern exactly what the meaning was. And I think if it had picked one and like focused more on that, or even just rendered what was there more clearly, I think it would have been meaningful. Like I like that the idea of Amor Fati accepting your fate, accepting what is, because I think you can read most of the characters' endings through that lens. Like Carrie Coon's monologue is in a way that of like accepting this is what it is, good or bad. This is, where things are. Tim ends up that way. So like I think there are different avenues into that, but the way it was constructed didn't build a hierarchy of understandable or discernible meaning for a really long time, which was frustrating.
Yeah. And I do wonder, I've read some articles that offer admittedly vague hints that the production was a little troubled. And I do,
even just from watching it, something about it
feel that way. Like Fabian, for example. What is he doing here? Like, and that's a wonderful actor. I saw The Zone of Interest. I thought there was a lot to praise about him and his performance. And he's so underdeveloped and underutilized. He offers nothing in terms of theme. Mook is another character that is just like kind of one-dimensional nothing, and just there to do something for guy talk. It feels, yeah, and so many plot lines that are hastily patched up in the finale or papered over or convenient and simplified, as we've talked about. I do wonder if there was some push and pull between folks who were working on this, whether that was actors or producers or Mike White, and we'll never probably ever get to see behind that curtain. But it does feel, you take everybody to Thailand, you keep them there away from their families for 7 months, which is how long it took to film this.
Very long time.
And you're in heat. I was reading an interview today with Jason Isaacs. He's talking about the heat. He's talking about the bugs. He's talking about the clashing personalities. He was very vague and tactful about it, but he was like, listen, some people are not friends anymore after this. And I just feel like you get this sense of a little bit of messiness behind the scenes. And when you have messiness behind the scenes, it can, but doesn't always, but can bleed out onto what we actually see on the screen.
Yeah.
I also read that apparently a lot of the first cuts of episodes were like an hour and 40 minutes long. So like they shot a lot of material.
I see. Okay.
They shot a lot of material, and he did these crazy like feature-length edits for like a lot of the episodes that then were cut down to the episodes. So the fact that the episodes still don't have that much like plot content means like what was all the extra stuff that was shot that was removed?
Well, I wonder if it was Fabian and Mook.
Maybe, yeah. Apparently Piper was supposed to lose her virginity to Zion. That was
because that never went anywhere.
Yeah.
I knew there was something with Zion.
Yeah. So like
he's got to be here for a reason.
There are subplots that like were completely removed. Yeah. So something interesting is happening in the edit here.
Yes, I see.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense, because I do feel like we've been talking about the edit feeling weird throughout a lot of this, and scenes that don't quite feel like scenes. Yeah, Piper as a character, like, she has a very simple, basic character arc that is not surprising or interesting, really. Like for the amount of time, you know, we talked about even in one episode, what she did was she made an appointment, and that was her contribution to that episode. But like, I feel like she's introduced as like there's something really interesting here. The performance is really interesting. Like, so that's not surprising, and I think really does help click some things into place where it feels like things are missing. But also that it's puzzling because it's so long that how could things be missing? But
well, and also it feels like other things there's too much of, right? So it's like why is there so much of like this thing when there could have been room for the things that feel like they were missing? I think we say that a lot when we talk about movies and stuff. It's just like it feels like you had 2.5 hours. Like, how did you not spend enough time with this character, but then you spent a whole lot of time with this other thing? I think that's part of the process, you know, and things are always going to feel a little uneven in that way.
Movies are hard.
Yeah. And as you were saying, Michael, at no point during the season did I decide I'm not going to watch The White Lotus anymore. Like, I'm ready for season 4. Like this show does have something magical for, you know, not for everybody, but for me, like, it attracts actors that I really want to watch act. It does the execution. While I agree the season has been more uneven, like the execution of the finale in a lot of ways was just pleasurable to watch. The music, the way things are shot, the way things are cut together, the build in certain sequences, like I just really enjoy it. And I think there's something you even mentioned, Trisha, about like, is there a meta thing happening here of like, we're all going to church on Sundays to watch our HBO show. And I even saw a tweet that kind of went viral that was like, I think it's really important for HBO to have a show on Sunday that we all watch and then talk about. I think the government should fund that show. It's socially cohesive in a way that like church, you know, may have been in a community, you know, once upon a time. And so I think there's something here where it's like, it almost doesn't matter if it follows all the rules it's supposed to follow. It's like, we're all going to church, to Mike White's church right now. Next week it's going to be Pedro Pascal's church. You know, like it's there's something with the HBO Sunday night event that, yeah, it kind of transcends the normal TV show thing.
That's what broadcast television used to be.
Right.
There used to be 3 channels and everyone would watch the same thing.
And it cohered the nation together. Yeah.
Right.
And that's what I said in the first half of the season about the water cooler moments, right? It's whether it was, you know, back in like Breaking Bad, Walking Dead, then Game of Thrones, you know, now Last of Us, like these shows that make you be like, oh man, what do you think is going to happen with this? Did you see that scene? Like, that was crazy. And the first half of the season, I was kind of waiting for those. And then we got a lot of it. Like that was the cool thing about this season, is like how many memes, you know, were there of like people doing their best Parker Posey impression, or like, oh my gosh, that monologue. Like, did you see, you know, Sam Rockwell's monologue, or obviously the Half Moon Party and all that kind of stuff. Half measures. What was it?
Full moon.
Full moon party. I was like, why did
I want a half moon?
The moon's at half tonight. And I think we did get that. I saw one that was Rick and Frank on the boat, and it said like, if I send you this, it means I've done zero prep, but I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And I feel like we did finally get that from the season. It just took a little while to get there, but I totally agree with you, Alex. My church starts next week with Last of Us, so I'm excited.
Yeah, all I was going to say is that the biggest difference between this kind of episodic TV drop and those is that those shows back in the day when there were, there were more than three, but, TV was measured in shares and who's getting more than the other guy. So you're specifically programming to compete with other TV shows. And when you have streaming and there are 400 shows, some of which are episodic releases week by week, but others are just on TV and people are just kind of watching them whenever, is that you don't have to do anything. And sometimes I wonder if not having to do anything is one of our problems. Mm-hmm. Like sometimes needing to, and we were talking on our film club about what episodic TV used to have to do. And it had all of these narrative imperatives of like, the show has to be this. It has to have this A plot. It has to have this B plot. It has to have this C plot. It has to have a thematic arc. It has to have this production set piece or whatever it has to have, because otherwise we're going to lose our share and we're going to lose it. We're not going to get renewed and we're going to lose our time slot and it's going to be a whole thing. And I'm not saying that there are not ways in which the streaming era offers, creators, auteurs advantages. But I also wonder if it does us a disservice sometimes by not having to compete too hotly for our attention.
Well, and I wonder, and we've alluded to this a few times during the season. We've been saying what these shows that know you're watching them, and so it's like the imperative has gone from we gotta hook viewers with these more traditional structures week by week to keep the attention share in this more, I don't know, traditional way, and now it's like, is there a memeable like face from this episode? Mm-hmm. Like, is Leslie Bibb gonna make that face during the Trump conversation? That is like a great new meme. The Rick's reaction to the Sam Rockwell monologue. Just like every episode does seem to have like at least one of those moments, and it's almost like that's the weird new imperative, and those moments are great, but if that's what matters, I don't know if any of this is conscious or if any of this is actually planned, but that seems to be like what's happening, is that this episode wasn't that satisfying, but it did have this one scene that I'm going to see on Twitter all week until the next episode. It's going to become a new reaction meme. It's going to become like can you believe this moment? And like, I like that, but yeah, maybe there's a strategy here where it's like, that's all we need, and whatever else is whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Put in a marching band, because
yes.
a reference people
what on
know.
earth could you be talking
Some
about?
thoughts about Severance, come to mind.
So all this is really interesting. I also mentioned a long time ago, Malcolm Gladwell has a whole episode of his podcast, Revisionist History, basically about this, of how like television has evolved and the religious aspect of it and how a shared culture was lost and all this stuff. And so I think it is interesting, and that's why it's fun to have a podcast and talk about the thing that everybody is talking about, because there is that sort of shared culture being created, being experienced. But I think this is a bigger conversation that we're definitely going to have at some point. We will definitely soon be doing a what is TV episode, because like the history of television, the different forms it has taken, and the tension between it and film, and sort of the weird crossover things that have happened as one stopped caring about spectacle and cared more about. Anyway, there's a ton of stuff to talk about with television and its history and where we are now in the streaming era in 2025. So keep an eye out for an episode on what is TV, because I really want to have that conversation. Yeah. And some of this will continue on as we continue to, as we've been saying, go to church, the HBO church next week with The Last of Us. Very, very curious to see what that has to offer. And I think there will be some good thematic debates that come out of that one as well. And I am left with as I was saying earlier, I still love this show despite being super frustrated at a lot of points in the season. There is something valuable And especially if given so many of the challenges on top of the normal challenge of just trying to make a thing, which is already extremely hard, that something like this with great performances, with great production value, and with like really powerful meaning in it as well could be created. That's pretty cool. So,
and like most shows aren't trying to do what this show is doing in terms of the thematic conversations, right? So it's like, it's one thing if I find them frustrating, it's another to be like, but I'm glad you're doing it. I'm glad someone's doing this.
Right. Most things don't aim this high.
Like we can have all these conversations that get into all this nuance, and Trisha can give that whole speech about all the different characters and what religion they found. Like we can do that because the show is aiming that high, even if falling flat in some ways. A lot of shows are not aiming that high at all. Yeah. So
we critique because we care.
Exactly.
Indeed. Well, this has been fun. This has been our conversation about The White Lotus Season 3. We're going to be back next week with The Last of Us Season 2. Very excited about that. I want to say a big thank you, as always, to the patrons that make this show possible. You guys are amazing. Thank you, thank you. Thank you to our producer, Vince Major. Thank you to our editor, Mike Worth, and the whole Nebula Studios team. I'm Michael Tucker. I've been joined today by Trisha Rand, Brian Bittner, and Alex Calleros. And we will see you next week for the premiere of The Last of Us Season 2.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.